Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another English video lecture. Now, for those of you who haven't been attending my online classes due to some reason or the other, we have made quite a lot of progress in the story. We are already at around page 27, page 28. We've established who Dr. Sadao is, we know who our main character is, we know where the story is set. We've learned enough about Japan so that we can move on with the story. Now, there will be other references to Japanese culture as well in the story, but I'll try to make sure that you guys understand everything properly. The reason why I mention people who haven't been in online lectures in this video is because there's a lot of explanations and there's a lot of stuff that we cover in the online classes that we don't do in the videos. The reason being the videos are supposed to supplement your online classes and not just be standalone. I mean, you can use them to study. That's the reason why I'm making them. But you also have to be in the online lectures because there's a lot of things I explain. There's certain things, that slip my mind while making these videos, and I address them in the class because people ask me questions. And the reason why I want you guys to be in class is because if somebody is asking a question and you don't know something, maybe they'll ask a question that you wanted to ask and you'll get your answer too. So anyways, I'm going to stop begging people to join my class because there is literally no reason if you don't want to join it. So let's just end this introduction here. I don't really want to make it very long because like I said, I have to record like a video explanation and then I have to record a voiceover for this. So I'll do the video explanation now and then I'll do the voiceover later, and we'll try to get as far as we can with this chapter. So I hope you guys enjoy the video. So now, as we all know, our main character, Dr. Sadao Hoki, his wife Hana, and they are living in Japan. Dr. Sadao Hoki is a famous surgeon and a scientist, and he's been kept behind from the war because like the war effort needs him to take care of the general, and they need him to research, ways to heal wounds, ways to disinfect wounds. Sorry, yeah, I can't talk properly. Anyway, so like the war effort needs them, and that's why he isn't drafted in the war. I've explained to you guys before as well, like what a draft is. If you haven't, like just make a note of it and ask me again. Basically, what happens like during times of war, what used to happen like in the Second World War, First World War, and all those stuff is like when like your normal army, like there's volunteered soldiers, right, who join the army. Like in our country as well, everybody joins the army. But if you're at war and you're losing soldiers faster than you can, replenish them, then you start drafting civilians into the war. So you basically send a letter to everybody saying like people from this age to this age are required to report to the nearest military center. Then they're evaluated physically and mentally, and then they are sent off to basic training basically. So you turn your civilian population into a militia, and that's what a draft is. Anyway, so right now we know what Dr. Sadao is, who he is, how he came about to be. He was sent to America by his father to study surgery. His father was a very straightforward, traditional Japanese man who believed in the ideas of race and being like a pure-blooded Japanese. He wanted Sadao to marry his wife, who should also be purely Japanese. Like, so his wife Hana turns out to be pure Japanese, but they meet in America as exchange students in this professor's house. Alright, so this is the story so far about them. Then like the scene moves on in the future and we are just with them in the house, which is next to a beach, and they run upon like this dude who is in the water. I know I'm calling him a dude, relax. So they find him in the water and they find out that he's been shot, and he's been shot in the back. Now let's move on and see how they deal with it. Alright, Dr. Sadao and his wife. Okay, a fisherman perhaps, Sadao said, washed from his boat. He ran quickly down the steps behind him. Hana came, her white sleeves flying a mile or two away. On either side there were fishing villages, but here was only the bare and lonely coast. Dangerous with rocks. Now what does it mean, dangerous with rocks? That's the reason why lighthouses were made in the olden days. A lighthouse would be placed in a cliff overlooking a sea, which was hard to enter for ships, which had many rocks, and the lighthouse would guide them all the way through. You just had to follow the light and you would dodge all the rocks and everything. Because it's not just like the huge rocks, it's like the tiny rocks which are just under the surface of the water. So if you don't see them, they pierce your hull, and like your ship's hull, the part that's inside the water. So they pierce them and then you start taking on water and your ship drowns. So basically that's why it says dangerous with rocks. Okay, somehow the man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn. This also happens with coral reefs. Like if you're ever swimming or diving or scuba diving, if you guys ever get a chance to go somewhere, in Maldives or Australia or the Great Barrier Reef somewhere, you'll see like coral is like a living organism, which has a hard exoskeleton, and it does, it is very sharp, so coral can cut you. So they saw when they came towards him that indeed it was so. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through. He is wounded, thou exclaimed. He made haste to the man who lay motionless, his face in the sand. An old cap stuck to his head, soaked with sea water. He was in wet rags of garments. So thou stopped, Hannah at his side, and turned the man's head. They saw the face, a white man. Hannah whispered. Now, a white man is significant because at that time Japan was at war, as we all know, like by now with the geography lessons and everything, that Japan is very isolated. So a man showing up in the ocean, being washed ashore on the beach in Japan is very highly unlikely. And the only explanation is that he's a prisoner of war, that he's an American soldier, that he escaped from somewhere possibly, or he was trying to get away from something. And he got shot in the back, and now he's washed over at Sadao's house or in the beach in front of Sadao's house. Okay, now Sadao remembered the wound when with his expert fingers he began to search for it. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. On the right side of his lower back, Sadao saw that a gun wound had been reopened. The flesh was blackened with powder. Sometime, not many days ago, the man had been shot and had not been tended. Oh, how he is bleeding, Hannah whispered again in a solemn voice. The mist screened them now completely, and at this time of day no one came by. The fishermen had gone home, and even the chance beachcombers would have considered the day at an end. What shall we do with this man? Sadao muttered. But the strained hand seems to be of their own will to be doing what they could to staunch the fearful bleeding. Now, as we see, like Sadao, even though he is in conflict because he is a Japanese soldier, considering technically he's a Japanese soldier, because the civilian population was also sent into the war at that time. He's not been drafted, but he's still technically part of the military. And even if he wasn't part of the military, the general Japanese population at that time were afraid of foreigners. They hated foreigners. As you can see, the emperor was like the mandate that they followed, like whatever the emperor said. So their emperor said, you hate the Americans, you hate the foreigners, they are our enemies. So that's what they did. But even then, his training as a doctor, his training as a surgeon won't allow him to let this man to die. So even while he's consciously making this decision to, why am I helping him? Should I be helping this man? Is it worth it for me to help this man? His fingers are already taking care of the wound, putting pressure on the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to make sure there is nothing stuck in the wound and anything else. He packed the wound with the sea moss that strewed the beach. The man moaned with pain in his stupor, but he did not awaken. Now, sea moss and moss is also used to pack wounds. It is considered like an option. I don't know what sea moss is, but seaweed can be used to wrap wounds. It's used to wrap food, so I'm assuming it can also be used to wrap wounds as well. Moss, I've heard a lot, tree moss and moss that grows on barks and stuff, like in the alpine forest or in the boreal forest. You can actually use the moss to cover your wounds, and it will actually keep them dry and keep them clean. So no idea about sea moss, not a doctor, so you guys can look it up if you find, if you're interested. Especially biology students, science students, if you're interested in any of this, you can find out does sea moss or moss actually have some sort of antiseptic or anticoagulant properties or something. The best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea, Sadao said, answering himself. So now, he's answering putting the soldier back into the sea would cause him, to have a much easier time rather than, trying to treat him or save him. Because if somebody finds out, later on in the story, we know that his wife and him have this conversation. If somebody finds out from the government that they are, treating or helping an American prisoner of war who is the enemy, they're gonna pay with their life. They're gonna pay with a lot of things. They have their family, they have their medical practice and everything. They might be losing all of it if they got found out, treating an American. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble talking. I know I've been trying to do these long cuts. I've been trying to record these videos in one take. It's harder than it looks. It's much harder than it looks. And all respect to anybody who can do stuff in one take, because I can't. It sounds like I'm retarded. I know I'm not supposed to use the word retarded anymore, but it sounds like I'm struggling so hard to talk. Anyways. Now that the bleeding would start for the moment, he stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. Yes, undoubtedly that would be best, Hannah said steadily, but she continued to stare down at the motionless man. Now you see, both of them are having this debate with each other and themselves that, what should we do? But they are good people in their hearts. They're not bad people, they're not bad human beings. And they're trying to debate it would be the right thing to do to throw him back into the ocean and avoid dealing with everything. And you can understand, if your family was threatened For example, if tomorrow somebody who our country was at war with, so let's just say like a Pakistani soldier, because that's who our country has been in war with. So a Pakistani soldier lands up outside your house, he's been shot in the back, and the government is saying like if anybody found harboring a fugitive will be shot as well. Would you still help that man, even regardless of what it is? Does your humanity still matter to you more than your government ideology or whatever it might be? If we sheltered a white man in our house, we should be arrested, and if we turned him over as a prisoner, he would certainly die. The kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea, Hannah said, but neither of them moved. They were staring with a curious repulsion upon the inert figure. Now, I'm not going to keep reading all of this because this explanation is already pretty long, so I'll just go through these pages. So I'll go through page 28 and page 29 over here. So I'll try to finish this here, and then the next two pages, page 30 and 31, and some more. Page 30 and 31, I'll try to do voiceovers for them. And then the rest of the story is quite a bit. Yeah, Jesus Christ, this is a very long story. Yeah, I was thinking that I could explain this entire thing in one video, but apparently I cannot. So let me try to get through as much of it as possible, and then we'll see how we'll do, how it lasts. Because in the online lecture we can cover quite a lot, actually, much more easier. So let's just wait, let's just do this, okay? So the kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea, but neither of them moved. So now there is something about him that looks American, Sadao said. He looked up at the Batacat. Yes, there, almost gone was the faint lettering. A sailor, he said, from an American warship. He spelled it out, US Navy. The man was a prisoner of war. So US Navy, prisoner of war, that means it's somewhere from that's the reason why I had asked you guys to read up on Iwo Jima and gave you the video and everything else. Because America had actually blockaded, it had surrounded Japan, with ships and everything, and there was fighting going on in the Pacific between America and Japan. So apparently, this is a sailor who got shot while escaping a ship or something. So maybe he might be from an American ship that was taken over by the Japanese soldiers, and then they were captured. So this is one possible explanation for it. He has escaped, Hannah cried softly, and that is why he is wounded in the back. Now, this is also what we discuss in the online lectures. We discuss, if somebody is shot in the back, there is only one way for you to shoot somebody in the back. Either you sneak up on them and you attack them from behind, or they're running away from you and you shoot them in the back. So that's the reason why he was shot in the back. They hesitated, looking at each other. Then Hannah said with resolution, "Come, are we able to put him back into the sea?" "If I am able, are you?" Sadao asked. "No, but if you can do it alone." Sadao hesitated again. "The strange thing is," he said, "that if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy. And he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is. But since he is wounded, you also cannot throw him back to the sea," Hannah said. "Then there is only one thing to do. We must carry him into the house." Okay, now look at this conversation, Sadao. "The strange thing is that if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy, and he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is, but since he is wounded." Now you see, Sadao starts off the sentence with conviction, with the things that have been hammered into his head by the propaganda or whatever it might be, that all Americans are your enemy, you do not trust any Americans, all Americans want to kill all the Japanese people, and the Japanese people can never work with the Americans, you can never save an American life, they are the enemy. So now in the first part of this dialogue, whatever he says, he's trying to convince himself, that, oh, why should I help this man? He's the enemy, he's this and he's that. And as you see, as he moves along with the dialogue, his reasons get weaker and weaker. After all, he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is. So that from I care nothing from him. I care nothing for him. He's my enemy. He goes to, from there he reaches. You see how foolish his face is. So you see, even he is having a hard time trying to convince himself that he shouldn't save this man. Because Sadao is a doctor at heart. He is a doctor. A doctor has to save lives. That's what their job is. That's what the oath they take means. So then his wife says, "You also cannot throw him back to the sea. There is only one thing to do. We must carry him into the house." Now, but the servants, Sadao inquired. Now, these people have servants. Come on, he's a general. He's a surgeon to the general of the Japanese army. He has a comfortable life. "We must simply tell them what we intend to do, to give him to the police, as indeed we must, Sadao. We must think of the children in your position. It would endanger all of us if we did not give this man over as a prisoner of war." Now his wife is trying to be the rational one in this conversation. We've already seen Sadao lose an argument to himself, and he tried to convince himself that he should throw this dude back into the ocean. But his wife now, Hannah, is being the voice of reason. She's trying to be the rational one, and she's trying to say, we have to tell the servants that the only reason we saved him is so we could hand him over to the police. We could have thrown him back into the ocean, but that wouldn't be the right thing to do as responsible citizens. We should hand him over to the cops. Certainly, Sadao agreed. I would not think of doing anything else. Thus agreed together, they lifted the man. He was very light, like a fowl that had been half-starved for a long time until it is only feathers and skeleton. So fowl is another term for bird, a domestic bird, so it's called a fowl. So his arms hanging, they carried him up onto the steps and into the side door of the house. This door opened into a passage, and down the passage they carried the man towards an empty bedroom. It had been the bedroom of Sadao's father, and since his death it had not been used. They laid the man on the deeply matted floor. Everything here had been Japanese to please the old man who would never in his own home sit on a chair and sleep in a foreign bed. So this is one example of how, traditional his father was. Japanese houses do not have chairs. They do not have beds as usual. They either have futons, which they like fold out and sleep, or they have mattresses, which they put on the floor, on the tatami mats on the house. So bamboo mats, they are usually used for flooring, and they're called tatami, T-A-T-A-M-I, so they're called tatami mats. That's what usually Japanese houses use, as flooring, as what they spread out their blankets on, their mattresses on, and everything else. Okay, so they don't have chairs. Traditional Japanese houses do not have chairs. You kneel on the floor. Or, there's like a tradition to kneel, where your feet are folded behind you and you're kneeling on top of it, and then you have to sit with the straight back and you can't, slouch and everything else. So there you see, like, his father was such a staunch traditionalist, so he would never in his own home sit on a chair or sleep in a foreign bed. Hannah went to the wall cupboards and slid back a door and took out a soft quilt. She hesitated. The quilt was covered with flowered silk and the lining was pure white silk. He's so dirty, she murmured in distress. Now, this line as well, this cupboard that she opens, like, you will see it in a lot of anime and a lot of Japanese media. If you watch, like, houses have, like, these cupboard with sliding doors. That's where they keep most of their bedding and mattresses. So, like, beds in Japanese households are not left outside and during the whole day. Once you wake up, you make your bed, you fold it, and you put it back into the cupboard in your house. So that's, like, the culture, that's, like, the tradition they follow. Now she's worried because she's giving him like this quilt, which is silk, and like this dude is dirty and filthy. Yes, he had better be washed, Sadao agreed. If you will fetch hot water, I will wash him. I cannot bear for you to touch him, she said. We shall have to tell the servants he is here. I will tell Yumi now. She can leave the children for a few minutes and she can wash him. So Yumi is the nurse. She takes care of the children. Now in the olden days, like everybody had nurses. There was a kind of the like if you were relatively well off, if you were relatively successful, you needed to have a maid to look after your children, because if you had your wife look after the children, that means you weren't doing well enough. All right. So Yumi, her name is Yumi, and that's their servant. So just remember this for the objective type questions as well, that the name of their servant was Yumi. But the utter pallor of the man's unconscious face moved him first to stop and feel his pulse. It was faint, but it was there. He put his hand against the man's cold breast. The heart, too, was yet alive. So this dude is losing a lot of blood. He is, wounded very severely with a gunshot wound, but his heart is still pumping, so that's what Sadao checks. He will die unless he's operated on, Sadao said, considering the question is whether he will not die anyways. Okay, so the question is whether he dies unless he's operated on. So what does that mean? So, like, if Sadao operates on him, then he might be able to fix whatever is causing the major bleeding, and and everything. So might be able to tie an artery. If an artery is clipped, he might be able to make sure, to stabilize this dude's heartbeat and to stop the blood loss. He can't do it unless he's operated on. The question is whether he will die or not anyways. The question is, if he doesn't operate, will he still die or will he still survive? Hannah cried out in fear, "Don't try to save him. What if he should live?" "What if he should die?" Sadao replied. Okay. He stood gazing down on the motionless man. This man must have extraordinary vitality or he would have been dead by now. But then he was very young, perhaps not 25. So the sailor that they found, they can say, like, he's very young, perhaps not even 25, which is what I explained, in the Second World War. A lot of soldiers, a lot of sailors, everybody that was sent to the front lines were basically 18, 19-year-old teenagers, 20-year-olds, men. They hadn't seen a lot of, they were very young, and they all went and fought for their country, and they gave their lives for their country. So this is what you see, all these soldiers who were sent to Japan to fight, they were all 18, 19-year-old soldiers, And this is a very interesting interaction between Sadao and Hannah. She says, "Don't try to save him. What if he should live? What if he should die?" Sadao replies. Okay, so now Hannah is worried about, like, if her husband Sorry, I keep messing it up. So if her husband is trying to save this prisoner of war who is an American, is he trying to fulfill his duty towards his country? Won't that be considered treason if he saves his life? Because as a Japanese man in the army, his duty is also to kill Americans. But then Sadao says, what if he dies? Because he's also a doctor, he's a surgeon, his name is Dr. Sadao. So now he's stuck in between a rock and a hard place between his duty towards his country and his duty towards his patient, or his duty towards his occupation, which is larger, being a doctor means that you are taking care of humanity. Being a doctor means that you are responsible for human lives, and this is why the conflict for Sadao arises. Because on the one hand, it's his duty towards his nation. It's his duty towards his nation as a Japanese man. On the other hand, he's also a doctor, so it's his duty as a doctor to save this man's life, and this is where the conflict in the story comes from. You mean die from the operation? Hana asked. Yes, Sadao said. Hana considered this doubtfully, and when she did not answer, Sadao turned away. At any rate, something must be done with him, he said. First he must be washed. He went quickly out of the room, and Hana came behind him. She did not wish to be left alone with the white man. He was the first she had seen since she left America, and now he seemed to have nothing to do with those whom she had known there. Here was her enemy, a menace, living or dead. And here you see, that shows the attitudes they had towards Americans, even though they had spent their time studying there, even though they had gone to America to live for a while, even though they had interacted with them. They might have American friends even, but now, in this moment of war, they are all enemies to them. She turned to the nursery and called Yumi, but the children heard her voice and she had to go in for a moment and smile at them and play with the baby boy, now nearly 3 months old. Over the baby's soft black hair, she motioned with the mouth, Yumi, come with me. I will put the baby to bed, Yumi replied. He is ready. She went with Yumi into the bedroom next to the nursery and stood with the boy in her arms while Yumi spread sleeping quilts on the floor and laid the baby between them. So like I said, sleeping quilts on the floor. Then Hana led the way quickly and softly to the kitchen. The two servants were frightened at what their master had just told them. The old gardener, who was also a house servant, pulled a few hairs on his upper lips. Now they have told their servants their servants might not be as educated as they might not have the same dilemmas that they might be simple people, but they are also saying the master ought not to heal the wound of this white man. The white man ought to die. First he was shot, then the sea caught him and wounded him with the rocks. If the master heals what the gun did and what the sea did, they will take revenge on us. Now you see superstition here. Superstition that the sea couldn't take him, so what the sea throws out, you have to put it back into the sea, whether it be a half dead man or whether it be the treasure or whatever it might be. So that's what he says. If you try to save this man, bad karma will come back on us. The sea will take revenge on Dr. Sadao instead. I will tell him what you say, Hana replied courteously, but she herself was also frightened, although she was not superstitious as the old man was. Could it ever be well to help an enemy? Nevertheless, she told Yumi to fetch the hot water and bring it to the room where the white man was. She went ahead and slid back the partition. Sadao was not there yet. Yumi, following, put down her wooden bucket. Then she went over to the white man. When she saw him, her thick lips folded themselves into stubbornness. I have never washed a white man, she said, and I will not wash so dirty a one now. Hana cried at her severely. You will do what your master commands you. There was so fierce a look of resistance upon Yumi's round, dull face that Hana felt unreasonably afraid. After all, if the servant should report something that was not as it happens. Very well, she said with dignity. You understand we only want to bring him to his senses so that we can turn him over as a prisoner. I will have nothing to do with it, Yumi said. I am a poor person and this is not my business. Then please, Hana said gently, return to your own work. At once, Yumi left the room, but this left Hana with the white man alone. She might have been too afraid to stay had not her anger at Yumi's stubbornness now sustained her. Stupid Yumi, she muttered fiercely. Is this anything but a man and a wounded, helpless man? In the conviction of her own superiority, she bent impulsively and untied the knotted rugs that kept the white man covered. When she had his breast bare, she took the small clean towel that Yumi had brought into the steaming hot water and washed his face carefully. The man's skin, though rough with exposure, was of a fine texture and must have been very blond when he was a child. So now we see this conversation, before we were seeing the disagreement between Hana and Dr. Sadao. Now here we see the disagreement between Hana and her servants, the old gardener and Yumi. So as we can see, Hana is kind of the way for the author to show us, all the conflicts that happen, all the ideological differences between the people. And that's the reason why Hana is kind of a mirror into this world, So Yumi is the servant, and like she helps carry the water and everything. But she says, "I'm not gonna bathe this wise man. There is literally like no way for me to do this because I'm just a poor person. I don't want to get this involved in handing over a prisoner of war and trying to save his life. I just want to live my quiet, simple life, taking care of these children, going back to my family, and living my own life." I don't want to deal with this now. Hana tries to yell at her, tries to scream at her, and says, "I'm ordering you. I'm your master. I'm your, you know, boss, and you have to listen to me." But Yumi is very adamant, and she refuses completely. She's like, "No, I'm not doing it." And then like Hana says, "All right, you can just go leave," because she doesn't want to, yell at her, because she understands like if Yumi chooses to do so, she can betray both her and Sada, and report them to the authorities that my bosses are keeping a prisoner of war safe in their house, and they're treating him for injuries and everything else. Excuse me. So she might have been too afraid to stay had not her anger at Yumi's stubbornness now sustained her. "Stupid Yumi," she muttered furiously. "Is this anything but a man and a wounded, helpless man, in the conviction of her own superiority?" So now here she says, in the conviction of her own superiority. Like before she tried to get Yumi to give this man a bath, she was very much against it. She was very vehemently saying that we should not have this man, he should not help this man, we should report him to the Billis. If you want to let him die, Sadao. And now, like once Yumi refused in front of her face to follow her orders, now she's like, how dare she follow her, disrespect me? How dare she not follow my orders? Look, I'll do it myself. I can do it myself. I don't need a stupid servant. I can do it on my own. After all, is this anything but a man and a wounded, helpless man? So now, just because she's angry at Yumi now, just because she's trying to, convey that Yumi is being stubborn for no reason, this changes from the enemy, which she was like just talking about, and then this turns into just a wounded, helpless man for her, So that's what this line means. In the conviction of her own superiority, because she believes so much in the superiority of herself that she is the master, she is right, that it changed her view, So it's just that, it just shows her attitude. So let's move on to the next page. While she was thinking these thoughts, though not really liking the man better now that he was no longer a child, she kept on washing him until his upper body was quite clean. But she dared not turn him over. Where was Sadao? Now her anger was ebbing and she was anxious again, and she rose, wiping her hands on the wrong towel. Then, lest the man be chilled, she put the quilt over him. Alright, so she wiped his body and everything. So she was thinking these thoughts, though not really liking the man better now that he was no longer a child. She kept on washing him. But she dared not turn him over. Where was Sadao? Now her anger was ebbing and she was anxious again, and she rose, wiping her hands on the wrong towel. Then she put the quilt over him. So her anger, which she felt at Yumi, which was forcing her to, change her opinion about this man, to say that he's just a man, to try to clean his wounds, to try to help him clean up and give him like basically a bath before Sadao begins the surgery. Now her anger is leaving her and she's getting anxious again. She's like, what is going to happen? What is going to happen? Sadao, she called softly. He had been about to come in when she called. His hand had been on the door and now he opened it. She saw that he brought his surgeon's emergency bag and that he wore his surgeon's coat. "You have decided to operate," she cried. "Yes," he said shortly. He turned his back to her and unfolded a sterilized towel upon the floor of the Tokonama alcove and put his instruments upon it. So it says the note, Tokonama, a niche or an alcove in a Japanese home for displaying a flower arrangement, kakemono, or other piece of art. So I'll put like links to the Japanese houses below, like the inside architecture here. I'll put like footage so you can see what like a Tokonama is and what a kakemono is. So you can take a look at that. Yes, he shared shortly, so now he's decided to operate. So he's sterilizing his instruments, he's sterilizing his hands before he begins to operate. Fetch towels, so he's asking her to fetch towels. She went obediently, but how anxious now, to the linen shelves and took out the towels. There ought also to be old pieces of matting so that the blood would not ruin the flying floor covering, so that's what she wants. She doesn't want her floors to be ruined with blood, because blood stains are really hard to get out of anything. Just so you know, like blood stains are one of the worst stains ever. They're really hard to get rid of. Like you have to try, like as soon as like it stains, that's when you have to start cleaning it. Otherwise, if it soaks into something, it's like there forever. Okay, she went out to the back veranda where the gardener kept strips of matting with which to protect delicate shrubs on cold nights, and took an armful of them. So these are all tatami mats that she's referring to. These are all bamboo mats and everything else, which is the most common material used. But when she went back into the room, she saw this was useless. The blood had already soaked through the packing in the man's wood and had ruined the mat under him. Oh, the mat, she cried. Now you can see like her poor floor. Like she's the lady of the house. She cares about the floor. She cares about like her house. You know, it's her house. She made it look nice. Now it's got a giant blood stain in the middle of the floor. Yes, it is ruined, Sadao replied, as though he did not care. Help me turn him, he commanded her. She obeyed him without a word, and he began to wash the man's back carefully. Yumi would not wash him, she said. Did you wash him then? Sadao asked, not stopping for a moment, his swift, concise movements. Yes, she said. He did not seem to hear her, but she was used to his absorption when he was at work. She wondered for a moment if it mattered to him what was the body upon which he worked so long, as it was for the work he did so excellently. Okay, now she is observing her husband in his surgeon mode and his surgery mode. So, like we said, we all have different professional phases and private phases. So Sadao is a surgeon, so his professional phase is going to be very different from mine, which because I'm a teacher, it's not like I'm saving your lives by making with this video. Like if I don't make this video, it's not like my class is going to have like a heart attack or something. So anyways, so he says, you will have to give the anesthetic if he needs it. Now, this is a very risky thing. Being an anesthesiologist is one of the hardest parts of a surgery. You have to study specifically to be an anesthesiologist because like a slight dosage can actually kill someone. You have to like make sure that they go under, but they retain enough consciousness that you can bring them back to consciousness as well. So it's very hard. That's why when he says you will have to give the anesthetic if he needs it, she repeated blankly, but never have I. She's not a doctor. And like the reason why I'm getting stuck is the reason why, like, because Pearl S. Buck is like a writer from a different time, right? Like, so the syntax she's using is very different, like, than modern English. And like, so nobody will say she repeated blankly, but never have I. Like, but like, see, that's the reason why, like, it's a very unique syntax. It's grammatically correct, but it's a syntax of its time, like this is the writing style of our time. So just pay attention to this, just a simple mental note. It is easy enough, he said impatiently. He was taking out the packing now, and the blood began to flow more quickly. He peered into the wound with the bright surgeon's light fastened on his forehead. The bullet is still there, he said with cool interest. Now I wonder how deep this rock wound is. If it is not too deep, it may be that I can get the bullet, but the bleeding is not superficial. He has lost much blood. Now, this used to be like an old thinking kind of a sort of a thing that like, if you get shot, you have to get rid of the bullet immediately. Countless movies of our childhood, from Bollywood to Hollywood have those scenes where the hero gets shot and then he like takes out the bullet and then, he's screaming, take it out, take it out. He bites down on something and then like somebody digs in with a scalpel or a knife and then gets the bullet out. Oh, the bullet is out and now everything is okay. In reality, that's not the case. Like the first thing they advise you in an emergency situation when either you have like an impalement or you have a bullet wound is to make sure whether there is an entry wound or an exit wound. If there is not an exit wound, then you put pressure on the entry wound and you do not try to like move the bullet or try to remove the bullet unless like you are with a medical professional. Because what happens is a lot of the times like the bullet goes in with such pressure and is like since it's superheated and like it's traveling so fast, it goes in, and unless until it comes out, like the exit wound, like so like a bullet goes in, there's like a small hole, right? Like an entry hole is very small, but the exit wound is very large. So unless if a bullet doesn't come out on the other side, what happens is like the bullet goes in and like it plugs in like whatever gap it is in. Since there is something inside the wound, it doesn't bleed as much. And if it hits an artery, like if a bullet hits an artery, it will stop the flow of blood. Like if it doesn't pass completely through and if it doesn't tear the artery completely, if it just hits and stop there, it will stop the flow of blood from that artery. And like, so it's actually much easier unless until like you're attempting like a full surgery. Like if you get impaled by something, if you get something stuck in your arm or if you get shot, it's much better for you to like leave that in and like, unless until you get to a medical professional. Now Dr. Sadao is going to do a surgery, that's why it's okay for him to remove this bullet. But in general terms right now, like any medical document will tell you like in a first aid situation or like in a first responder situation to an injury like this, you never try to remove anything that is inside the wound. You never try to remove an object from a person. You try to leave that object as intact as possible and you try to put pressure around the wound, So the bleeding is not superficial means that there is actually an artery or some organ hit or something is hit that is bleeding a lot. At this moment, Hannah choked. He looked up and saw her face the color of sulfur. So the color of sulfur is yellow, so her face is choking up because there's so much blood. People can't handle the sight of blood. I'm pretty okay with blood. I don't do bad with blood. I've like chopped chickens and when I was younger and everything else because I used to live in a farm. My grandmother had a farm, so we grew up in a farm, so you had to like chop your chickens and everything else yourself. Doesn't really bother me that much, but I have seen people who faint, like, even like while shaving, they cut themselves, they faint. Or somebody cuts their finger and they see the finger bleeding and they faint. So, like, not a lot of people can handle blood. Don't faint, he said sharply. He did not put down his exploring instrument. If I stop now, the man will surely die. She clapped her hands to her mouth and leaped up and ran out of the room. Outside in the garden, he heard her retching. So she's throwing up because she's seeing blood and gore for the first time. And exploring tool is basically forceps, like very narrow forceps. So he's inserting forceps into the wound. Forceps are basically like scissors. Instead of like, so they're like scissors like this, but like the front part of the scissors is like curved. So you can actually grab stuff with it. So you can grab stuff, you can use it to like make sutures, you can use it to like explore a wound and grab stuff from inside somebody. So that's what he's using. That's why it's called, that's the exploring instrument. It's called forceps. Okay. So Sadao tries to finish his surgery, without his wife. His wife is outside. That's why he says, it's better to have an empty stomach when you're doing this, because it's gonna get worse before it gets better. That's the same with any surgery. Before you are able to like remove the bullet, close the wound, and sew it all up, it's gonna look horrific. So I'll just stop here. Because we need to move on. So we'll do our online class tomorrow, and then we'll do a little bit more. We'll go through a few more pages, and then like for the final video, I'll try to finish, like the last video I'll try to make is gonna be like the final video for this chapter. So that might be long, that might be at least 45-50 minutes long. So be mentally prepared for that, people. Like I said, this is a huge chapter, and that's why I'm taking so much time with this. Please attend the online lectures if you haven't attended, and if you've watched this video for now, like if you watch this entire video, I respect all of you who watch this videos to the end. You guys are incredible. That's the reason why I work so hard. That's the reason why I try to make scripts and try to do these one take things, because I want to like have like a simple flow. I want this to be a conversational flow between you and me. So everybody who watches these videos to the end, thank you so much. It's like people like you who watch the videos, like I know there's like 100 and 200 students that I'm teaching, and it's only 30-40 of you who regularly watch my videos, and it's only for you guys that I make these videos, that I put in these this much effort, is because if you guys can benefit from me talking to you, like I'm your teacher, and if you can benefit from me doing this much for you, then like I will of course do it for you. The only problem I have, like I said, like people don't put in the efforts, people don't put in as much efforts as we do, as teachers. So that's the only thing. But for the rest of you, thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you guys soon in class. I know I haven't been providing PDFs for this chapter is because there's just so much information, I don't know how to divide it into PDFs. So I'm just trying to get the explanations done first. Once I'm sure that you understand this entire chapter completely, then I'll probably give you like a 20-25 page PDF. I'm sorry kids, like it's a lot of study required here, and it's gonna be hard, so just keep up with me, I guess, and I'll try to keep it as interesting as possible. I hope this was fun. I hope I wasn't boring, and if you have any questions, any queries, as always, Discord is available. Please make notes of this video, and I hope to see you guys soon. Take care, everyone.